Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Blame It on Marketing. I keep saying another like I'm bored, and I don't mean it. This is the second time now. I need to come with more enthusiasm. Another episode of Blame It on Marketing. There we go. Today, we are talking about marketing foundations, which could sound a little bit dry, but we're definitely looking to dig into where things go wrong. And actually, there's two stages of marketing foundations where things get a little bit awry. But I will stop talking and let our guest speaker, Lottie, introduce herself.
Hi. Yeah, what an intro. So my job is to make you feel like it's not just another episode.
No, no, no.
So I'm here to make Ruta's day a little bit less bleak. My name's Lottie Unwin. I am founder of two businesses. One is called Upworld, which is a world of expertise for curious marketeers. So I was really lonely when I took my first step into startup marketing. Knew that I loved marketing, knew that I loved startups, but knew I did not love being alone and reporting into a founder who had many different ideas to my ideas and found that just really difficult. So I started a supper club. That supper club has grown. There's now 1,200 people who just create this like really wonderful safe space where there's no such thing as a stupid question. And it's all, warm, lots of good stuff, lots of personal development, lots of actionable things that make us better at our jobs. And then I run a business called Brand Hackers, where we run fractional teams for brands with big dreams. So founder-led businesses typically who want to take on the world, but don't necessarily have the budget for all the resource they need to do that. So we give them exactly what they need in terms of manpower and nothing more than that. So that's me, but sort of 10 plus years in all things startup marketing, literally live and breathe this stuff, spend 5 hours a day on LinkedIn, looking at campaigns, and lots of time in shops, geeking out on what's going on.
We are very lucky. I think we've got three people who've got a lot of startup experience between us, which is always nice, isn't it? All those startup marketers, we come with all that trauma. It's nice. So the reason we wanted to talk about this is because quite often what happens, and you do get this quite a lot with startups, is, and actually as Ruta alluded to in the intro, is there's actually like two areas where organizations and especially startups try to run before they can walk. And that is, first of all, in the sort of like early stages when you're just getting going and maybe you've got your first marketer and there's all that foundational work to do. But also, Lottie, as we sort of joined this conversation, Lottie was sort of saying, actually, there's another time where this becomes problematic, which is as you're trying to scale. So maybe it's you're trying to get your Series B or C funding and you're trying to scale and you're trying to, raise that money and trying to, I think Lottie's example was to trying to become Nike, but actually there's still only one marketer. So how do you do that? And how can you make sure you're ready for that? So I guess, Lottie, why do you think so many organizations try and skip to the, in air quotes, good bit when it comes to marketing?
Why? Because they're ambitious and because they're dreamers. And you don't start a business because you want to get to the bit where it feels really hard. You start a business to get to the bit where you're like making loads of money and everyone knows your brand and you're really cool and everywhere. That's why you do it. No one dreams of the bit where like every penny feels really hard fought for and you can't see where the growth is coming from and you're doing stuff that feels really labor intensive. So I think it's totally human that you're impatient for the hard bit. I just think the mistake I see so often is businesses trying to jump ahead and therefore prolonging the hard bit. It's like, to make it go fast, you've got to be really pragmatic about what you need to do to get through it and do nothing else. And if you try and treat yourself to the hours you entertain running like an integrated 360 campaign when you've got 150 grand and actually you can like maybe have a go at one channel in one city, you're just wasting time versus being really realistic about what is in your is in your capability and is what the business needs at that point. Like, the business doesn't need high reach when you've got 700 distribution points nationwide. It's just like, it's completely out of sync to the commercial objectives. So I think the trick is to just do what is needed right now, only to allow yourself, like, in the knowledge that when you get through that, you'll get closer and closer to the promised land, and to enjoy the journey. Other than, but I think, you know, to your question on why, I think it's totally human. I really respect it. I hate being the naysayer that has to be like, no, you can't do the fun stuff. No. So I think you've got to reframe it and see the bit you're in as fun. To stop, like, you know, it's classic grass is greener. Stop waiting for like this great day, and just get really clear on what's needed now.
It sounds like there's quite a specific skill set needed in that time where you're trying to really narrow down on what's reasonable and what is going to bring the business in. And I don't think every marketer thinks in that way. Do you think a lot of, like, I guess getting that bit wrong is actually hiring a marketer with the wrong mindset, or they're just not had the exposure to this kind of, like, it's business strategy, isn't it? As much as it's marketing, it's where do we go, where do we make our money right now? Do you think that's where some of that tension can come from?
Yeah, I think, you know, you've mentioned two things there. So one is hiring the wrong kind of person. I think often brands hire the skills they need for 3 years' time. I'm all in favor of hiring the skills you need for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months' time, but not too far in front of your nose. Otherwise, you're actually just hiring like a different person for a different business. So that, I think, yeah, Ruta, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think even when you've hired the right person, I think there's a very specific skill set as to what's required, and that's about being really single-minded. That's about being incredibly demanding of your leadership team for clarity on the commercial context. You have to really, really know what is actually necessary, and that requires a pretty tenacious, like, internal operator, and then someone with real strength of character to turn that into a whole series of decisions about what you are going to do and what you're not going to do. I think the third thing, kind of, that you didn't mention is about direction from leadership. So I think you can take a great startup marketer and you can throw them in 10 different directions by being too ambitious in terms of what you're trying to achieve, like the number of fronts on which you're trying to fight. When I think a great leader at that time in a business's growth would say, the only thing that matters is our relationship with trade, because I know we don't have enough resource to also deliver genuine scaled consumer demand. So we're going to do the first job really, really well. And I'm going to give you the confidence in that decision to enable you to focus. And I think it takes a great leadership to empower a team to do that, as opposed to saying like, oh, but what are we doing for, you know, how are we going to grow with a younger customer? It's like, why the fuck are we talking about growing with a younger customer when we haven't got any old, like, you know, it's like, stop pushing people into, we don't have any customers. Like, why are we expanding our customer data audience when we've got, like, you know, 0.01% penetration of our core? So yeah, I think leadership direction is really critical.
My favorite type of leader is the one that reads a book over the weekend and then comes in and is like, we're changing everything we're doing, we're going to do it like this book said, and it's just like, please, let's not do that. Love that.
So that's a really interesting example. You know, yes, you actually do want the leader who reads the book over the weekend. You want the leader who reads the book, calls their head of marketing, says, I've read this book, I've had these thoughts, but I'm really open to what you think, and I know that this is our strategy, and I'm really clear on my strategy. Because you still want people to be intellectually curious, and you want the head of marketing that says, I hear what you're saying, I'm choosing to completely ignore you, and I'm articulating that I'm ignoring you because I believe that we know what we're doing. However, let's like mentally park that thought for 2025 when I'm so excited to think about the time when that's going to be relevant for us. And that requires there's a lot of strength and conviction required always round in that conversation.
And I think sort of along that thread, I think there's also a point, because so Lottie, you're talking quite a lot there about consumer goods and B2C stuff. Ruta and I kind of generally come from a B2B world, so it's really nice to have this sort of like, actually there's a lot of parallel here, the overlap, which is really, really nice. Well, I was about to say nice to see, but it's the same shit, just a different day, right? But I think it's quite interesting that there's this other thing that I keep thinking of when you guys were talking about that, which is that there's something up with us as marketers, right? Because we take on jobs where we go, I can do this, I can do this for you. So no matter where a company is in their journey, a marketer will go, I can always do that for you, or I can always try and do that for you, whatever it is. Like, because we always go into a new job being really ambitious and trying to showcase that we are the right person for the job because we want the job, and that might be motivated by many, many different things. But is there not a world that we should live in as marketers where we go, I'm not actually the person that can help you scale to 10 million to 50 million. I'm the person who can help you grow to 2 million. And therefore, once I've helped you do that, I'm going to clear off and go and help another company do that, because they are very different skill sets. Thoughts?
Making a brilliant point. To be that person who's like, I read a book once, but there's a book called Spike. There's a great book called Spike about super strengths, which is a concept that I take really seriously. So the principle is that everyone is the best in the world at one thing. So to be the best in the world, it's got to be very specific. None of us are the best B2B marketers in the world. None of us are the best communication strategists in the world. Like, we might be the best, so for example, I think my super strength is that I am really, really good at taking a load of abstract data points that are like quant, qual, anecdote, insight, gut, and turning that into a really cohesive story that drives incredibly clear choices in a context which is quite emotionally charged. So I'm not good at doing that in a boardroom. I am really good at doing that with a founder who is, so torn up with passion about what they're doing that they can't see the wood from the trees. So like, the point is, knowing what that is so central to being able to make those kind of decisions, Emma, and to be able to say, that's not the right job for me anymore, or this job is no longer the right job for me anymore because I can't deliver my super strength. Because what's being asked of me is actually the context has changed, so I'm no longer operating in my super strength, or I don't have the team structure I need to operate my super strength, or like, I'm not great at delivering through huge teams. I'm good at delivering through a team that is small enough that I can like personally energize every individual in that team. And so I have to know when the bureaucracy of a business is going to get so complicated that the requirement on that has like outgrown my super strength.
We all know what that is, right? Like, we all have had jobs where it's like, oh no, this is not the environment that is for me. I feel like you've got to have really big balls to go into an interview and be like, hey, I'm going to be here from now till when you reach 2 million, and then we're going to say goodbye and it's going to be great. Because I think some founders would find that great if they're experienced and they know how this works, because we see it in sales, right? Salespeople are like segmented into different revenue brackets, but I don't think that's as common for marketers. So yeah, I think it's a risk to do it, but at the same time, if you're going to be picky and you want to find the right place to work at, being able to say that and for it to be taken on and seen as a positive, not as a negative, like, that's going to be a really good green flag, at least I think.
I think we all have a loose sense of it.
I
would like, especially if someone's like in an active job hunt process, I would always encourage them to like do that work, to really write it down. And there's a really nice exercise you can do where you just ask friends and family, just like send a type form to like 10 people you've worked with, 5 of your mates, and say, what am I best in the world at? And it begins to give you a really coherent view. So Ruta does sound like you're clear, but writing that down often I find really grounding, because then it gives you the framework to say, I loved that job interview, but actually it's just not a situation where I'm going to be able to operate my super strength. And then the idea of telling a hiring manager in an interview that you think there's an end point for your impact, I think is epic. I also think it's fine to just do that in your head. Like, yeah. I think it takes such balls to say, really, it's like that unspoken thing, right? Everyone knows you're going to be there for 2 to 5 years. No founder really expects you to be a lifer. So it's kind of
what?
implicit.
Sometimes they do. I've met people.
Okay. Fair.
Yeah,
Some do,
because
but
they think it's going to be this journey and you're all going to be together, and they only need to hire once. Which maybe if you're a bit more of an experienced founder or you're older and you've had other businesses, it's different. But yeah, sometimes.
I think that's a little bit of a red flag, just in like terms of delusion and like lack of consideration for what it takes to really. And it's culty, and it's like assuming that you're not going to have to work to keep someone motivated.
Yeah, I was going to say it's absolutely like cult mentality.
Which we love.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but within reason, I think, right? Because the other day, I was doing this conference, Stephen Bartlett was talking. He was saying that he's got people on his team that have worked for him now for 10 plus years, right? So that's since sort of when he started the Diary of a CEO and all of that stuff. Like, it's been going on for a lot longer than everybody realizes. That team of people have been with him that long. And I was thinking to myself, are they institutionalized? Like, that's what happens to people who work. I'm someone from the charity sector. That's what happens from when you work in the charity sector or the public sector, is you get a bit institutionalized and you go, are they all sitting there wondering if they're actually any good at their jobs anymore? Like, because that's what happens to people, right? So I don't know that I sort of agree with Lottie that it's a bit like it's really good if you could have an honest conversation with a founder, especially if you're up the senior end of the marketing job. Like, everyone knows that a CMO or a CEO or whoever it is, or a CRO, is only going to be around for a certain amount of time, because that is the expectation on the job. So I think it's one thing if you're going in for that sort of role, but if you're a marketing exec, you're never going to walk in and go, I'm only going to be here for 2 years, then I'm going to piss off. Like, keep that in your head. But know if that's the journey that you want to go on, that you've got it in your head, but you're really, really clear about your own kind of career path, I think. But that also takes a bit of thinking and a bit of navigating, doesn't it?
Just one more point on this. I think the other way to potentially handle this, instead of being like, hey, I'm only good at this bit and I'm going to fuck off after, be like, I'm really good at this bit. Once we get to the end of this bit, I'm going to need support to continue doing the next bit, if we're going to be doing that. Whether it's someone senior or consulting or whatever it is, because you might really enjoy it, like it might be a great company and you don't want to leave and you want to expand, but you need to be aware of.
And I think it takes a while to know this stuff. So if a marketing exec said to me in 2 years' time, I'm going to not be good at this anymore, I'd be like, think you should, we're all still exploring. And I think it's really important to keep pushing. Yes, do the jobs that are in your super strength, but make sure that there's like enough edge that you're pushing your boundaries and allowing yourself to evolve as an individual and discover new situations that make you shine. So, but seriously, it's so important that we all recognize we're like baby steps in our careers, and we talk about ourselves as though we're this like esteemed finished articles, and actually, absolutely not. We've got so much to learn and grow.
Yeah, nowhere near. So on, like, obviously we've talked a lot about our kind of like us as individual marketers there, but like what do companies kind of sometimes get wrong when it comes to like setting marketing up properly from the outset? Because obviously sometimes otherwise it feels like you're a bit doomed to fail.
Yeah, I think they set KPIs that are completely disproportionate to the investment they're putting into the function. And typically that's because they're setting KPIs, or like not necessarily setting KPIs, but like giving verbal direction that is asking someone to deliver on way too many fronts. So it's fine to have really stretching KPIs for one part of the funnel or one audience. That needs to be proportionate to the investment and by investment I mean time and money. I know everyone thinks of like money first of all, but it's also hugely about time. So who are the people that are doing it, and how thinly spread are their priorities? So yeah, the biggest thing I see is like multiple audiences. So in a B2B context, it's like, we want you to sell these 7 products to these like 5.5 slightly different audiences, and we're giving you the budget that's probably appropriate for like one of those jobs, and there's one of you. So I think that's the biggest thing that just happens over and over again, and that ultimately is a lack of strategic clarity.
Have you got any rules of thumb when you when you are maybe looking at a budget or like the complexity of marketing that you follow. So if someone's looking at this, they can kind of mentally quickly check.
So I do a process called zero-based budgeting where I actually don't know how, like, I got taught this at P&G and I've used it for my whole career. It's probably written about in loads of books, where you get very clear on the one thing you need to do first. So if you only had £1, what would you do? Cool, that's the first thing on your sheet. And then what does it cost to deliver that? And then I think the key addition is how much time is that going to take? So cool, that's going to take, and this is the column that always gets missed. So it's going to take me 2 days a week over 6 months to deliver that one objective. Great. If I could do a second thing, what would I do? If I could do a third thing, what would I do? And you keep going in order of priority. And this is why understanding your commercial context is so important, because you can't prioritize unless you really know what needs to be done. And then the task is so simple. It's like, okay, my budget is $500,000. I literally go down my cumulative column that shows me when I reach $500,000 spend, and I draw a line. And I will not do anything below that line. And then the other thing is, okay, cool, I've got a marketing manager full time and I've got a marketing exec 2 days a week. Cool. They run out of bandwidth at this point. And so that's how I do it. And it sort of sounds, it sounds really easy, but it actually is. Like, it's not one of those things that sounds easier than it is. It just is easy. It's just quite brave. And then you sit in the meeting and they say, but can you do a bit of this as well? And you say no. Or you say, okay, what above this list would you like me to deprioritize? And I'm going to play back to you that what I heard was that the only thing that matters is that I get 10 times more calls booked this month than I did last month. Therefore, I don't think I should be doing some great long-term awareness driving campaign, as much as I would love to, but I don't think it is, because what I've really heard from you is that the primary objective is calls booked. And you just do that over and over again until you've got alignment.
And does that cause friction though for your do you feel like at odds with yourself when you have to say stuff like that? Because I think that's the thing that, so because we I'm sure we are all of the same opinion, marketing is holistic. So I know that if I stop doing brand awareness stuff and if I pull the plug over here and I turn the tap off over there, then the ability to actually get those calls booked becomes almost nigh on impossible, because you're not doing the other stuff and you're losing, kind of like, I always think of it as like digital real estate. You're losing your houses all around you. Like, so, or do you feel like that's just the way to get them to agree? Yeah.
I think it has to come from a really thorough understanding of the financial picture. Sometimes your back is against the wall, and if you don't get to a certain point by a certain date, the money runs out. I would always rather have a job than have no job but good brand awareness.
Yeah. Well,
I love that. That's going to become my motto.
Yeah. So it's kind of, and that's why it's so important that the finance director is your best friend, and that you really understand what's going on with the investors, and you really understand what the internal mechanics of the world in which you're operating are. Because Emma, I completely agree with you that it's like, if all you do is like sales enablement stuff and you don't do anything top of the funnel, that sales enablement isn't going to work. So then it's like, okay, so what I need to do is highly targeted top of the funnel, which isn't about building prospects that are going to be, in a long-term sales funnel, but it's about building familiarity with a really key audience, which means actually maybe my CPM might skyrocket a bit because I'm going to reduce my targeting, but I'm going to make sure that I'm doing enough to make sure that those efforts to convert to call work. It's just, don't make decisions that are based on a privilege you don't have. So if you work for a business that has tons of family cash and they can get more, and like that's not an issue, and then the only thing that's an issue is trying to hit some good metrics because it's going to unlock a partnership, or like, there might be a different commercial goalpost that enables a very different strategy. Those moments that feel painful are actually the moments where you're really being strategic. If it doesn't feel a bit gut clench, a bit like, are you sure we have to do that? then I would sort of challenge myself, which I have to do all the time. I'm saying as though I'm this like incredibly cutthroat operator. Like obviously I get in a pickle all the time. But if I don't have those moments, then it tends to mean that I'm being a bit wet somewhere and I'm like not really seeing the reality for what it is.
Lottie scares me in like the best way possible. Like I'm in love with her, but she scares me a little. But I
think
like
I'm
it.
just like doing real like boss bitch Friday. Like I don't know where all of this,
I love it.
all of this energy is coming from. But I think I'm just sort of like preaching to myself. Like if I could operate like this more, I believe I would be better at my job. And when I'm operating like this a bit, and I'm having those really frank conversations with founders where I'm like, I know we would all love that, but how are you going to pay for it? That's when you get real results.
One of the things that I'm falling in love with Lottie over is talking about business concept, the financial standing of things, and understanding what the strategy for getting to the next bit of funding or whatever it is, which I don't think enough marketers really dig into. But one of the things that I typically find gets missed out in the foundations, if we're talking about the foundations of marketing, is setting up your measurement of things early on, and not just going and doing shit and then being like, oh, actually, I didn't set up any tracking for this. I didn't check what things were before and are now. So all the shit we did, I have no idea whether we should do like keep doing it or scrap it or whatever. Because obviously I'm a big old marketing metrics nerd. So I'm always like, make sure you can fucking measure shit that you need to measure before you start working. But that's, I feel like, one of the areas that is really just the stupidest thing to miss, but also means that you're just going to be operating blind for so much longer.
Yeah, I completely agree. I completely agree. I do lots of work in retail, which is an interesting counterpoint to this. So there are, branding, quite hard to measure. Retail marketing, so hard to measure. Like delightfully impossible to measure. And I think it teaches you some interesting lessons that are like applicable. I do work for B2B, I do work for retail, and it's interesting what that mindset gives you. And I think the thing you have to do, imagine you're selling like a bar of soap and you have absolutely no idea when a customer comes into store why they bought that bar of soap, and you can never know. So you have to let go of the desire to try and know, because it's just sunk cost. Like unless your day job is going to become standing at the aisle asking people, in which case all you're doing is getting like the equivalent of last click attribution anyway, because they're never going to say, oh, I've actually seen you 7 times and I saw you in a hotel and then my mum used you and then I got a discount code, and then like you're never going to know that whole journey. So you've got to give up on it. What that forces you to do is to understand what your brand is, understand who your customer is, understand all the data that you possibly can know. So do your homework, but then you have to make a principled decision. And you have to say, my business is about really trendy soap for millennials, and it's really novelty and it's like squidgy. And therefore my principle is that TikTok is going to be my lead channel because it's it's inherently TikTokable, and I am going to back it. And you can't test and learn that approach, because you can kind of look at what happens to sales data a little bit, but you can do more and more TikTok, and you will never know whether those TikTok sales are attributed to retail because you'll have done a promotion, and so you won't be able to see whether it's a promotion driving it, blah, blah, blah. And what that forces is a bit of like, I've just got to do this well for 12 months. And that's not to say that you can't review, and there are data points you can gather, but I think some of what the joys of being in a world where we can A/B test everything, and that we can, for most of the time, we can see all of our metrics. I think some of the downside of that is it means we don't commit to anything and we do nothing well. So it's almost my counterpart, like my counterpoint to, when I start working with a founder and they always say to me like, well, let's just test 10 things. and let's make sure we've got all of our reporting set up. I'm like, well, we'll have our reporting set up, but we won't really know what we're reporting. So I've got a really good live example of this at the moment. I'm working with a great business that's helping FMCG brands get access to their category data so they can finally see how their competitors are performing. B2B proposition. We're doing lots of top of the funnel stuff to build brand awareness, and we can see that reach is increasing. Referrals are growing, so more contacts are introducing them to other contacts, but they're not getting loads of like direct inbound at the moment. And their view is, well, we've tested building brand awareness. It's not driving inbound, and therefore it's not working, because everyone that's coming to us is a referral. And so what's driving that is my network, not top of mind awareness. I'm like, yes, but why has your network remembered you? You know, why is your network getting in touch again? And it's like a classic attribution issue, right? Like it's showing up as attributed to word of mouth, but actually that word of mouth is completely driven by the reach and engagement that's come from a whole other load of activity. And what that's showing me is the growth in brand awareness is triggering people who already have familiarity with the founders to get in touch, which is like the first positive indicator. But what it's demonstrating is the huge need for way more familiarity before that like flywheel is going to work. So yes, Ruta, obviously I agree with you that getting reporting set up is really important. But I think the slight downside to when you have your reporting set up is you become a slave to the reporting, as opposed to being driven by a clear direction of what is right for your brand and business, and a kind of a bit of like belligerence to make it work.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I completely agree. And me and Emma, sorry, we'll let you talk. Me and Emma talk about holding back certain metrics for ourselves and not sharing them with anyone until we are sure that they mean something, or we need to get into that kind of detail. So I'm so with you.
Yeah, and we've seen it. Like I worked in a business that basically got hold of the marketing metrics and basically used it to point the finger, because they were basically looking at the raw metrics and saying, this shows us this, but there's absolutely no color to that. You're just looking at raw data. You're not listening to the expertise of the marketers around you. And it's like, and then in this particular example, because I will give it, they basically were like, we're going to turn all the paid spend off. And then they wonder also then why all of the organic stuff fell off a cliff edge at the same time. And it's like, well, of course, it's all going to run off a cliff edge because the two things interact with one another, and they are basically like keeping each other afloat almost in some respect. So yeah, I think you've got to have the numbers. I think the other thing that people need to understand is that for different businesses, the numbers mean different things because there is so much context lacking. You can look at conversion rates for one organization and look at for another, and they could even be the similar sector, but they are completely different depending on their market and their audience and everything else. So I think but having them, but also having access to someone who can help you understand them and create a narrative with them that is accurate is really important, because that's the other thing, right, Ruta? It's like you've got all the numbers, what the hell does it all mean? Because that's the conversation that I end up having with a lot of people. And I think that's basically what we end up talking to a lot of people about, is you've got them all, and now what? So I think maybe it's a bit about understanding your limitations, maybe when it comes to the data.
All of the things that we've spoken about, where we get the foundations wrong, or maybe there's a misalignment in expectations or shitty goal setting, how have you seen that impact marketers in their jobs? And I guess not just in terms of being able to do marketing, but also, you know, their well-being and how they feel about their skill set and all of those things, Lottie.
Yeah. Well, I kind of had to start, like I started a business because I had a real problem, which is like I felt really, really lonely. Felt like I was kind of screaming to myself and no one was listening.
Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah. Now delightfully I've got like a LinkedIn following and have like all of the nice places where I can be like, who's listening to me? But yeah, back in the day I had none of that. I think, I know we talk about like work-life balance a lot, but I think for lots of people their identity really is wrapped up in work, and I think that's difficult and has its flaws and its challenges, but is a reality. And unfortunately, we're like in a society that makes not doing that really hard. Like, when was the last time you went to a party and the first question wasn't, what do you do? Like, until that changes, it's not our fault that we define ourselves by work. It's like we live in a world that's asking us to define ourselves by work. And so, of course, we do. And that means that if every day you feel like you're failing because you are in an environment that gives you no choice, you feel like you're failing as a human. It's not just what you do 9 to 5. Like, it's quite a human experience. And I think that's really bleak. And I really feel for people in that place. And I've been there and I'll be there again. But now I have a support system. And I have real comfort in the fact that every other marketeer feels exactly the same way. And I don't think this is just isolated to marketeers. Like, that happened to be like the calling. I think it's like a huge problem in like high pressure professional environments, and actually in all professional environments. I think there's a real expectation that all of us, that like you have to be a high flyer at work. And I think lots of people are just like, I'm not interested. I want to be good enough, and that's fine. And I don't think that's a very socially acceptable position, but it should be. It's totally fair enough to be like, I'd much rather be better as a daughter, a mum, a friend than I am as a, performer in a workplace. So I think it's pretty bad. And I really don't think it makes people do their best work. It's like, it's a massive, we all know that people are better incentivized by positive reinforcement than they are by threats, like the carrot and the stick. That's a pretty familiar concept. And yet we're almost structurally set up to be in stick mode, because the only carrot is that you might come close to hitting base level expectations. You might fail a bit less abysmally. Sort of feels like the best anyone can do.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's definitely something in that, because I think a lot of this does come from it's bad managers, rubbish expectations, goals not being set properly, people not understanding the actual mechanics of marketing, so therefore not able to support you. And I think we did a really good episode actually on this with an occupational psychologist. So for anybody who needs to go back and revisit that episode, there's a lot of really good advice in there about what you should do if this is the situation you're in. But I think if you're in that situation and you can't remove yourself from it, because I think that's one of the options you've got, I do think there's an element of you kind of then have to do the work yourself, right? You then have to sort of set yourself some realistic goals, try and figure out for yourself how you kind of remove, like, we're all like this. Like, this is, Ruta and I talk about this again all the time. We are our jobs. We really wish we weren't, but we are. And the work has to be about how you actually like dislocate who am I as a person? I'm not just Emma the marketer, I'm Emma and I'm all these other things. And sometimes you do have to sit with yourself and try and figure out how to do that. And sometimes that is also quite painful.
I couldn't agree anymore. I think being in a headspace where you blame your boss is a total waste of time. Like, they're not bad bosses. They're under their own pressure. You will be a bad boss in time for someone else. So like, it's not their fault that they don't understand your craft. It's not their fault that they're rushing too fast. You are too. And I just, because we do lots of recruitment work, I speak to so many people who are kind of jumping out of the frying pan into the fire because they're moving away from a bad boss. Like, I mean, there are examples. There are bad bosses. I'm not saying that like that's not the problem. I'm just saying there are, but you have to get your own head in order, set your own boundaries, do your own work, have enough clarity on what you're trying to do. Like, all the time I'll speak to people who will say, I've got this bad boss. I'm like, cool, so what is your strategy? What do you think they should do? And they don't know the answer. So don't like kick off that someone upstream hasn't given it to you on a plate unless you absolutely have your like manifesto down and you've communicated that manifesto over and over again and they're still not hearing you. Then you've got a real problem. But I spend a lot of time coaching like mid-level marketeers who are trying to get into senior roles, and it's just like throwing the hot potato of responsibility. Like, you've got to hold that hot potato work out what you're really saying. And then there's a whole other thing if you feel like you're not being heard and you've done all of the right stuff in terms of communication. But yeah, I get a bit kind of tired of the like, I don't have the support I need thing. It's like, well, definitely don't work in a small business. If that's where you're at, like go to a blue chip where they can offer you that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, know what your priorities are at, depending on where you are in your life, I guess, right? And actually, like you said, Lottie, it's all right if you just want to go to work and you want to earn your money and you want to go home at the end of the day. But there are companies that you do that with, and startups are not those. That's for sure. We've only got a few minutes left, so we want to turn this on its head, because obviously that could end depressing otherwise. So what are some of the things do you think that organizations could do and get right to help marketers, kind of get set up so that they can walk before they run from the outset?
Do good strategy. So really know what needs to happen. Be transparent about your commercial context in full. As an aside, I now employ quite a big team, and I'm absolutely astounded how rarely I get asked an interview about the financial context. It's just really interesting how far off the radar it is. I expect to be grilled about my bank account. If you were going to come and work for me, I'd expect you to know exactly what my cash position was, and how much I had in debt and all of that stuff, and no one asks. So ask those questions. So I think what businesses can do is get their strategy right, be really transparent about their financial context, and kind of over explain that from the get-go to create a culture where it feels really comfortable to keep digging. And actually, I think a lot of it's also softer stuff. So provide a support network, recognize that individual is going to be quite lonely. So give them the budget to take a colleague out for lunch once a month, really encourage them to meet other people, make that really celebrated. So don't make them feel like they're meant to be internal all the time. Like really celebrate the fact that they've gone out and met these people at drinks and had this idea and all of that stuff, because that's what's going to keep them sane and build their resilience. And then I think coaching and mentoring is really important. So give them the frameworks to put that in place. So to my point on, getting really clear on what you're trying to articulate, a lot of that is about having an external sounding board to practice those messagings with, to say, this is my strategy, tear it apart, and have a coach go, why could you do that differently? So you've practiced all that objection handling. So yeah, I think it's probably a combination of strategy, internal framework, but also like a whole load of support that gives them the tools to solve their own problems. So I don't think if you're a business leader, you need to see it as all on you. You need to say, I'm going to do what I can. I'm going to recognize that I'm going to fall short of what they need in some areas, but I'm going to make sure that they've got everything at their disposal to fill in those gaps. And then it's really for the individual to make the most of those tools.
So we're going to end there. We're going to end on a high with all the good stuff. So thank you so much, Lottie, for joining us. Please.
Thank you. Had so much fun.
Oh, it's been awesome. I think we've had a very, very good, open, honest conversation between the three of us. That's been lovely. So Lottie, we will link to everything that you do and your stuff. So, anyone in the show notes who wants to check out Lottie's various businesses, we'll make sure that you get all the links.
Yeah, Upwells is definitely the place for all of that stuff.
Absolutely. And also you can always join Ruta and I we have a Blame It on Marketing community. So if you also need to have a secret vent where your boss can't see what you say, then you can join us there, and we'll get your questions answered. So thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Lottie. And we'll see you again soon.